Before I introduce this panel, I've been notified that many of you are tweeting with different hashtags. Gosh. Election audits, plural. Election audits. Also, Claire just reminded me that this will be the room that we will be in the rest of the day today, as well as tomorrow. So hopefully you'll all remember how to get here, and things will be great. Okay. So this is actually super cool for me to be sitting here with some of my former colleagues and friends from Colorado. And I know that you've heard a lot about Colorado, but I think this is going to be a different presentation than what you've heard before. One of the things when I'm out on the road talking to people about risk limiting audits and the risk limiting audit that we did in Colorado, and I get folks that feel a little bit overwhelmed or a little bit hesitant, I guess, that they can do something similar in their state, I remind them that Colorado had a couple of advantages. One, the voting model in Colorado made it an ideal environment for this to take place. We centrally scan ballots, and the way that we track and organize those ballots was perfect. It was a perfect fit for a comparison audit. But also, Colorado had recently decided to purchase or contract with a vendor for a uniform voting system, more or less. Most counties were getting ready to acquire a brand new voting system, and it would all be the same system. And so that made that transition a little bit easier. And then the thing that I'm really hoping that this group can share with you, well, too, we eased our way into this. So this is something that was being talked about and worked on for a number of years, plural, not months. But most importantly to me, because I was sort of a latecomer to the party, these folks up here, they were the pioneers in Colorado. I was impressed and continue to be today, especially as I get out into other states and jurisdictions, by the amount of collaboration and cohesiveness and willingness to work together. Counties working with counties, counties working with states, bringing in other stakeholders, bringing in advisors, working with the vendors in a very just, cohesive, collaborative manner. And I feel like that was really the key to their success. And so you're going to hear about some of the things that they did that not only made it feasible to do a statewide audit, but what I see now is essentially they created this state of risk limiting audit experts because of the work that they did in sort of documenting and training and doing this. So we'll start with Hilary Hall. Hilary has been the Boulder County Clerk for 12 years and is just an extraordinary woman. She would still be the clerk, by the way. There's term limits, believe me. I'm pretty sure she would still be there if that wasn't the case. Yes. I knew that she was a powerhouse when I first came to Colorado and found out she was the first clerk. Remember I told you clerks do a lot of things. The election officials don't just run elections, right? She was the first clerk in Colorado to issue a same-sex marriage license once that legislation had been put in place. And it speaks volumes about the way that she's out front sort of thinking about how to serve her constituents and how to improve the processes and make government work for people. And so we're excited to hear about her message about how risk limiting audits was implemented at a county level, as well as some of the history. Next, we'll hear from Neal McBurnett down at the end. Neal has been an election advocate, auditing expert, documenter, I guess, of this process. I think I first became acquainted with all of the resource material that was available because of a website that Neal had put together that's done an extraordinary job of sort of painting the whole history of risk limiting audits in Colorado. But more importantly, besides being involved in sharing his thoughts and ideas in the rulemaking process and in the procedures we were putting in place, Neal helped work on the auditing software, and he'll talk a little bit about that, I believe, that's in use in Colorado. Next, we'll hear from Rudy. She is fantastic. She wears many hats at the Secretary of State's office. Hilary has been there since graduating from law school, which I think is impressive. It was like, wow, I always hear people say, we get really good, talented people in, how do we keep them? And she's one of those. And the thing that she does extraordinarily well in Colorado is we have this cohesive training program where, in addition to overseeing the voter registration system and voting machine certification and county support, she also ensures that all of the election officials in Colorado receive training on a regular basis. They have to take tests. They have to be certified. She makes sure that they all know what it is that they're doing come election day, and that's a pretty big weight to shoulder. And she'll talk about that process, because I think that's really important, that you understand how do you take this idea and concept and turn it into a workable program so that you can teach all of the election officials across your state to be doing it in the same manner, to be doing it consistently. In order for this to work in a statewide environment, there's some really critical pieces of information that need to get fed into this audit software, which means every county needs to do that correctly. They need to organize their ballots correctly and track those correctly, or we end up with discrepancies. And so her training was invaluable to the success in Colorado. And then last we'll hear from Pam Anderson. Pam was the Jefferson County Clerk for 8 years. Yes.
Term limits.
Term limits. And naturally, she was a leader there as well. She, along with these folks here, Hilary, I should give you credit too, really helped pioneer and push forward the voting model that is in existence in Colorado today. So when we talk about transforming elections, these are women that have done that took a model that wasn't working, went to bat for the rest of their fellow county clerks, fought with the legislatures, fought with secretaries of state at some point, not our current one, because they believed in the system and they believed in the model that they were fighting for. And so naturally, when her term was up, the Colorado County Clerks wanted to keep her around. And so she is the executive director of the Colorado County Clerks Association. And sort of keeping with this theme of collaboration and providing resources that work down at the local level, helps spearhead, again, with these, see, there's a theme happening here with the state, and Hilary Hall was part of this as well. Sort of a playbook that local officials could turn to. So even though they'd gone through this training, they'd gone through the process, now how do we refine it? How do we document it? How do we provide step-by-step guidelines so that we can once again ensure, because what happens in our community, in our world, right? There's constant turnover. New clerks get elected, staff leave, and so to keep this continuity, they wanted to ensure that there was something documented and that was not something we'd have to keep implementing over and over again. And so Pam's gonna talk to you a little bit about that. And also just working, again, on the collaboration side, how to get all 64 counties, rural counties, big counties, well-resourced counties, less resourced counties, and everything in between, all functioning as one sort of cohesive body. So with that, I will turn the time over to Hilary, and let's get started.
Thank you. 1 second to pop up. Boulder County. It was a tricky one. All right, thank you. Okay, we're not on the first slide, sorry. There we go. So first, thought I'd just give you some statistics so you understand both Boulder County and Colorado a bit and can relate to the jurisdictions that you're working with, because I do think our size also helps us with our success as well. There's jurisdictions that have as many voters as our state has that are trying to do some of this work, and so scaling is definitely one of the issues there. So My outcome here is to plant some seeds. Really want to get a good conversation going. We have time for questions at the end, and I'm hoping that we get to those. So I'm going to do my part to try to stay in my allotted time. Get us talking on election weedy stuff, and it goes off. And then also the other part is to, can I see a show of hands of who in here actually administers elections currently? Yay, that is fantastic. Who does it at the local level? That is fantastic as well. All right, so that has definitely improved since we first started talking about audits. I'd be like the sole person raising my hand. So that's good news. And I don't know if you know that, but there are a lot more jurisdictions out there that are administering audits. So one of the things I hope that we can take from this is how do we get more people involved in the conversation? The good news is that people are, doing the steep part of the curve, and so that oh well, they actually think like me and they're an election administrator, so okay, maybe it's okay, as opposed to hearing a theory about how something should be and having to figure out how to implement it. So I'm hoping you can take some of that from our story and our path. The jurisdictions you're working with are all at a different place on that curve, and so that's why I kind of want to do what our history was and how we evolved to see, is there a place for you to jump on and just do better, right? And then keep moving until we all get gold stars. So that's kind of the plan there. So I'm going to talk about how I came to this and how we kind of evolved both for Boulder County, and then it led to evolution in the state. So first off, I ran for office in 2006, and I say this also for those of you who want to impact those others who make the decision as to whether an audit will happen. Neal, and I want to publicly thank you, this is probably my last opportunity to do that, for all your work. And Neal got to me early, before I even got elected, so there's a strategy. You see those people who are coming in, and they have, especially if they come from outside the office, right, they don't know what is possible. So when you start talking, they don't already start making pictures of how hard that's going to be, because we don't know yet. So, that's the first thing. Go with the ones who don't know what they're getting themselves into and approach them with audits. And I'm so thankful he did, and he came at it from a very, he probably said a bunch of other words, but the ones that stuck were, it was a time when, HAVA was being implemented and counties were moving to DREs, and, they were very active in keeping Boulder on paper. Some of it was for audit, some of it was just, because, well, it was probably always about audit and verifiableness, but they would talk about whatever story, whoever was making the decisions, to get that, because they weren't ready to have the audit conversation. And a lot of focus on equipment certification. And the part that Neal said to me that just really resonated was, we do all this work, we have this national certification, how do you know it worked? And that's what an audit does. You need to have an audit. I get it's more complex than that, but again, remember, they're working with people, how do you get them hooked? How do you know that certification secured the system and it worked properly? And we had to have an audit that actually audited election night results. And we've talked a lot about it now, but that wasn't really a conversation back in 2006. And so for me, that was like, it seems so logical and like, well, why aren't we already doing that? Well, as we know, there's lots of reasons of moving into that direction. So then today, we have other motivations, right? People are distrusting our system even more. We have the whole Russia hacking story and narrative out there. The other piece, margins are getting closer and closer, and people, when they get closer, processes come out. And so audits can actually be another step, as we know, in verifying that. It's also, RLI now is being held up as the gold standard. So those are other motivations to get people like myself motivated to move in that direction. And it's still, equipment certification is still part of this process. And so again, how do you make sure that all of that work we do to certify something is actually working on the day that it's supposed to work and that the winners win? So there's two parts that are evolving at the same time. One is our election equipment and process, and then I'll also talk a little bit about how the audits evolved over time. So first, Colorado, way back in 2006, and was this polling place or vote center. Most of the people, we were moving towards DRE with a VPAT. Some counties, two of the major counties had equipment that already did that, so they didn't have the VPAT. So that's just the environment. Yep, I wasn't going to shame you publicly, but yeah, her. But she inherited the equipment, so exactly, she inherited the equipment. And again, majority of ballots were starting to be cast on these DREs in our state. So then in 2008, voters started choosing mail ballots. So we moved to, and Pam will give a much more detailed timeline of this, but this is just to show you the two pieces that are moving at the same time. Voters are choosing mail ballot. We had permanent mail was a choice to people sign up. I liked it and others liked it because it was moving people towards a paper ballot. We didn't really talk that much about it, but that was an outcome of what was also occurring. Others liked it because it was, our ballots are long. We have a lot of citizen initiatives and initiative process, so people could vote at home. And people, once they didn't have to sign up every year, really liked that. So you're kind of getting this win-win, and whatever door they came in was great, and it helped our audit process with that. More places were also offering paper in their polling places and vote centers to go along with the move towards a mail ballot. Then in 2013, as Jennifer mentioned, we moved to an all-mail ballot election. So now we have voters, unless they come to a voter service and polling center to use some of the accessible equipment at that time, everybody was really, majority of people were voting on a paper ballot. And again, that really led to our ability to do more. And now today, most are voting on the same equipment, and they have a cast vote record. So that's kind of the equipment evolution that was going on at the same time. Then we had, so here's the audit evolution over that time period. First, we had an audit where you selected a contest and you essentially rescanned a batch of ballots from a machine that had been selected after election day, and you audited to that rescan. Because we didn't have any way to know, we had the whole election, or we had nothing. We didn't have chunks of results in order to compare ballots to. And so the way to get that chunk of result, you went back to that. You did with your VPAT have that, but again, you didn't have the tabulation results. So with that, it was really a rescan, and at that point, you just picked one contest. So after talking with legislatures, then they decided they would add, the way to improve it was to do the same process, but to do all the contests. And so, that was okay, but again, you're deploying your resources equally. Like someone who had no opponent, you would audit them equal with someone who had a margin of 0.5%. So it was, there's still some work to be done, but still at least we're checking. Then where we came in was we had the HART system, and so you could run batches, and then each one was burned on what they called an MBB, which is essentially like a digital, it's a thumb drive. You burn results on that, and then you load them, and you can choose how often you do that process. So we're balancing how do we process our elections. So PS, we weren't going to burn 1 MBB per ballot. That was never going to happen, right? So we did it at our natural batch level, which was 150. And then when we got closer to election day, we'd go up to 300 on the MBB. So we at least had not the whole set of election results, we had chunks of election results with which to compare actual ballots with. We also were moving to paper, as I mentioned, so we had the paper ballot, and in Boulder County, we only had one accessible piece of equipment per polling place. So majority of our ballots were also still on paper. Talk a bit more about our process with that. So then we went to rescanning, doing some after-election processes. Some of the counties in Arapahoe was one of them, where they practiced the principle of a risk-limiting audit but with after the election, and then they scan their ballots back through another system, and then we're able to go back and look at those results. And now we're up to where we can actually audit election night with cast vote records, and that was really the piece that we were missing, is technology that gave us how this ballot was tabulated by the equipment. And so that's the process that we use now. And it's great, but I'm here to talk about the Colorado model, so there are other methods. I think it is important to know that this is one way to get there. So with us, our evolution, what we were trying to achieve, and just to be really clear, we called them statistically enhanced audits. We knew we were aspiring to be a risk-limiting audit and the concepts of that, and we knew we weren't there. People sometimes they, chunk things down into smaller pieces, but just to be clear, for those of you who know the difference between what we're talking about, is we knew they were just statistically enhanced. We wanted them to be better was the goal. And we had some other outcomes that I was trying to achieve through my education with Neal and all the group that he was connected with out here, which was we wanted to definitely audit our actual election night results. That was a big one. To not rescan our ballots was a huge piece for me. Now I have lost. There. We also, you at the national group and especially EVN were working on election audit principles, and we wanted to see how as many of those as we could incorporate. And so we wanted all of the contests to be eligible and to not know that ahead of time. That was an important principle there. So no one could tamper or adjust anything if you knew which contest you were going to audit. So that was important. We wanted them to be randomly selected, both the contest and the batches. We also wanted to make sure that the workers didn't know ahead of time what they were counting to, because we wanted them to be independent. And the obvious one is we wanted it actually to be statistically based, not just a flat, do a bunch of them, right? So we wanted it to have the margin impact the amount that you did and which contest would be selected. So even though it was a random choice of the contest was weighted by the margin. So the selection process, the closer the contest was, the greater probability was that that contest would be selected. And then we would audit. The first round, we didn't audit everything, and then after that, we would audit everything on the ballot after the selection had occurred. So, again, evolution on there. The other thing is we also wanted to be as transparent as we could be while still protecting voter privacy. That's still one of the goals and still one of the areas that we can need to continue to work on. We'll talk a little bit more about that, too. And we also really wanted to create a predictable workload. And so we knew our current state, the bar was 500 ballots or 5% or whichever was less. And so we knew the maximum workload with our current audit was 500 ballots. And so we knew we would do at least that, if not more. And so we figured out kind of how much time could we get done in the window, because we had to get this done by certification as well. And so you have those time pressures. So we would select batches until we reached our threshold of workload, and we would determine that ahead of time based on the number of resources and how many teams and how long it took them. So those were our principles that we were trying to do early on, and did right up until the 2012 election, where we calculated that in order to do the batches, it would have been 40 hours of additional scanning, and we somehow didn't have an extra week in our calendar in the presidential election in 2012. So we did the best we could, and then we ended up doing the audit after, this type of audit after the election. So I'm really happy that we are where we are now, though, that we have gotten these pieces worked together. And before I left office, we were actually able, at the statewide level, to do a risk-limiting audit. So there were obviously lots of benefits. These are just some of them that we were trying to achieve. I think the ones to point out are, and the selling points for others is that it actually can be fewer resources. I think the unknown part of that, though, is you still aren't sure how many you need depending on what happens. As you talk to elected officials, those are like the anxiety-provoking words. Well, it depends. Not one of our favorite answers. So, if you find a different way to phrase that for people when you're trying to enroll them in this, that'd be really good. Let me know what you tell them. So those are some of the challenges that we still have, is how to actually manage the resources and plan ahead. Even in this one, we still got calls. So we did round one at the state level, and people, several days before we're about to start the audit, didn't get that, if anyone in the state has an error, your team may be coming back. That was just, we just weren't used to operating at that state level. So those are the pieces that are essential to making it work, but we still also have to get people to think how to plan for that and how to prepare with those things. So those are some of those. The other part, it does impact your canvas, and we luckily got our canvas window adjusted, so we get a few more days to certify our election, especially when it falls during the week of Thanksgiving. That is never a fun week. Somehow those election judges are just not really motivated to come in on Thursday of that week. I don't know what the problem is, but neither's the staff. So those are some of the pieces that just, again, the more predictable we can get and the more we have an idea of what it looks like, the easier it is to get people to enroll and not be quite as scared to do the audit in the first place. But the other part with that is people have to be prepared, if you have an issue, to go to the full-blown scale on it. So those are some of those. So here's some of the things that I take away from being 10 plus years of swinging away at this. As it's been mentioned, partnering absolutely have to partner, both with your community, with people like you all who know really the details and the math behind what you're doing, because you can't be experts in everything, and it really is an ecosystem. So even when parts are clashing with each other, I really believe it in the long run, it helps make it better because we're all bringing part of the picture to the table to find the best solution that we can find. If you're looking to get this implemented, do find a motivated election administrator and get them before they know exactly what they're doing. That's also be the other one. The other part with that, and I say that because totally, like I'm mocking myself, just to be clear. The other part of it is the more you can, when you put the word pilot in front of anything, everybody just kind of goes, oh, okay, I don't have to be perfect out of the chute. I might be able to be willing to give this a go. And so that's the big thing. And then, really do go slow to go fast. It's, these are cliches, but they're accurate for a reason. It is really just to build that confidence and then help everyone in order to be successful. Yeah, hand counts, people suck at counting ballots, so we still got to figure that out. I can't even tell you, you do your LAT and you have people counting and totaling. So yes, that's part of this. The ultimate escalation is a full hand count, so we really need to be thinking about how our process is to be successful on that, because that's another thing for election officials, right? When they look at someone, when you say the word hand count, we change it to manual verification, by the way, that freaks them out, because they know how bad people are at it. So that's another piece for us to continue to work in there. Make your law vague and your rules specific. Laws are hard to change. Rules you can adopt much more easy. And when you don't know what you're doing, if you put too much in your statute, you got to put enough in that it'll happen. But to try to leave that as vague as possible, and then get really specific in your plans. Some of the other ones, again, just making sure that you have processes that everyone can be successful with. And another benefit of an audit is that you discover issues in the audit process with voters that it doesn't mean the equipment was wrong, but there are areas where voter intent, you can improve how you communicate about voter intent, especially when you're a central count and a mail ballot state, how to help them vote as they intended, and also make sure that it then gets tabulated accurate on that. So, and the other piece is, CVRs and voter privacy are still really complicated. We're still working on how do you, I think there's people who believe there are some simple solutions, but again, it's an ecosystem, so you got to look at all the pieces that go into it. Let me see here. Yeah, so next, again, we just still got to work on our anonymity, continue to improve our processes, and looking at processes, especially that impact the cast vote record and anonymity. I think with redistricting coming up, so the more you can make how your ballots get created, the fewer district styles, the fewer unique district styles, that will help with audits in the long run. And we have that opportunity in 2021 when we'll be doing that. And then the last piece is to have the conversation on how do audits impact recounts and what's that relationship. So those are some of the things I see for the future. And I'm hoping you guys will ask us more questions about those. Thanks.
While she's setting, I'm going to just take this out. While she's setting up the presentation, I just want to do a little unpaid ad. Verified Voting has come out with 2 reports which are available on the table right over here. One on the Orange County audit in California in June, one on the Fairfax, Virginia audit. And there's also something from an independent group of researchers, the principles and best practices for post-election tabulation audits, that is also available on the over there. And if you look at my Twitter feed, NEALMCB, you'll see links to online copies if you don't get a real one. So I will, I guess, sit down here and avoid dropping too many things. So I am Neal McBurnett. You've already heard kind things. Thank you. Hilary really deserved, she did the big lift. I'm a geek. I bring I bring the wisdom of so many people in the audience to bear. I'm having fun. Hilary is standing up in front of an electorate saying, on a deadline, I'm going to bring you a scary audit on top of an unimaginable kind of mostly volunteer at that point based workforce of people, that everybody cares about. And it was the Barack Obama, John McCain election, and so it was a big deal. So, thank you. So I'm a consultant. You already said most of it, but I've also been a poll worker. And everyone in the audience, if you haven't been a poll worker, just do it. Just somehow show up and be on the helping end, because it teaches you so much.
We can't in most states.
Yeah, well, get that fixed somehow. I'll also note that there are, I missed that, sorry.
Oregon.
This presentation is available online. There's a link at the end, and there are hot links to things like the Center for Election Science, and that I'm a board member for, and a huge set of data about the history, which starts with, well, actually, before I go into the history, my big point that I really want to clarify is because of what Hilary mentioned, because of the systems that we have, the processes we have, and the data that we bring to bear, we now have the ability to do cutting-edge audits. They are ballot level, comparison risk-limiting audits. They actually, for the tabulation part of the election, and we have to audit a lot of other things, but they actually reduce the risk that you're going to get the answer wrong, which is kind of what the electorate wants to happen. We can do that in Colorado in hundreds of contests across the state. We can do that in overlapping districts within the state, which, trust me, thank you to the team at Democracy Works for making that happen in ways that are sometimes surprising, how many complications that engages in. And to do it very efficiently. So we're usually in the 4,000 ballots across the whole state to get that evidence on a huge variety of contests. Those are for the contests that you actually hit a risk limit on, and that depends on what the margin is. The state does not guarantee hitting a risk limit on all the contests. At the moment, frankly, it doesn't even report it so that you would know, and we're trying to make the reporting more convenient, as you'll see later. But besides the ones that we target for audit, we also audit all the rest of them. Anytime a ballot shows up to audit, all of the contest data is entered, and all of that is tracked, and someday it will all be reported. And that allows you to calculate a risk level for the ones that didn't hit a risk limit. And to me, that's critical. A lot of people think that the only important race is the top of the ballot. I think that a local bond election where people are spending a bunch of money, asking taxpayers to spend their money and so on, and have a lot to stake locally, can be very important and important to get it right and not have any of the things that could go wrong go wrong. So, and just to underline that the state system, everybody talks about the cost of getting a system that can do all this. The state system in Colorado is among the cheapest, most cost-effective options you can have. It's central count, so there isn't a lot of equipment in all the polling places, a lot of other things. So still accessible with BMDs, but it really brings a lot to bear. And as you were talking, it occurred to me that I think we've gone from one of the hardest things to audit. When Hilary accepted, helped pick some equipment, the hard equipment, and accepted the responsibility to audit it, we didn't sort the ballots into countable, reportable units. We had to redo things. 40,000 ballots, I think, or votes actually, were audited in that 2008 election.
Crazy, by the way. Crazy.
And before that, they were counting on all those 500 ballots. They were getting all the contests, which is still a big lift. And they weren't getting any results to speak of for those 2004 audits. They weren't actually auditing the election night results. So we've gone from kind of getting started with audits with something that is way behind the state of the art in other counties, other states at the time, to, I think, something that is really exemplary. And I'll just note that there are 4 vendors that met the requirements for doing ballot-level risk-limiting audits, comparison audits, back in 2015. So the vendors ought to know how to do this. They don't always tell their salespeople that they know how to do this. But there's 4 of them. And the code that was developed as part of the last year and a half of work was open source. It was developed by two different groups of people, Free and Fair a year ago, Democracy Works now. I had the privilege to work with both of those teams. And it can be applied to audit this kind of audit kind of anywhere. I want to come back to this kind of the history and note proudly that in 2003, we had 4 parties in Boulder, Colorado say, we want paper and we want audits. And to go to the county commission and say, you're not going to get those DREs, you know. And they listened, and there was a lot of support. And that is part of what has, I think, helped grow make all of this work elsewhere. But it's hard. You all, a lot of here are facing pretty difficult learning curve and work to get there. So I'm just going to cut to some of the issues. You may not think this is a big issue, but Philip will back me up. You know, from the get-go, you don't typically, unless you've done things right, you might not have the data that you need to audit. You need to publish what you're going to audit before you roll the proverbial dice, which we're going to be seeing some of later this afternoon. And if you don't have the data that you need to report on the stacks of paper that you've got to work with or the individual ballots, you're really sunk. So there's a whole bunch of work that I'm not going to go through that John Wack and others at the VVSG, the EAC's next generation voting standards are trying to pin down. This is what you should report. This is the way that you need to report it and make it easy to use. I also want to highlight one of the things that, as Hilary alluded to, there's still some work in progress, but we're very committed to is not only convincing the election officials that their counts match the paper ballots, but putting enough evidence out for the population, for the losers. How do you convince the loser that they lost? And for the voters, where's the evidence that says this election got the right outcomes for the audits, for the contest that we're auditing? There's a document here. Again, you can find a link to it if you find these slides online that goes through in considerable detail how to look for the right chain of custody data, how to document the results that you've got along the line. There's a lot of pieces to it, and the software that we have will produce that data. And if that data gets shared, anyone can use it and can reproduce the results themselves. And by the way, some of that work on how to reproduce results is exemplified in the reports that Stephanie Singer and I put together for Orange County audit, that Mark Lindemann and others put together for the Fairfax audit. And open source code is kind of all over this field. So we're delighted to help you reproduce, help citizens reproduce the results. And that's critical. I think there are vendors that are offering things they're calling risk limiting audits, but if it's implemented by the vendor and if not everything is shared and if it's not based on paper or whatever, if citizens don't have the data that they need, I don't think it's not. I'll just tell you, it is not a risk limiting audit. And I think we've been very careful to try to highlight the importance of actually basing decisions on the paper ballots. At the first level, I think Colorado has succeeded at convincing elected officials, the people with access to the data, that everything worked out well. I think to get to the next step, we have to work through some of the, I understand that this is really hard to do. I know that there are aspects of it, since I haven't seen the data, that might be harder to make the ballots anonymous than I understand, and continue to want to work with everyone to make that happen. Because many states will not have this problem. It's an artifact of some of the redistricting issues that we have in Colorado and some other kind of complexities. But at the moment, I can't say, here is the data. And I did reproduce all of the discrepancies for all of those hundreds of contests in the most recent audit. And part of that is because when you do this across so many different districts with different boundaries and overlapping areas, it's very tricky to figure out which discrepancies actually matter from the standpoint of a risk limit and which are kind of opportunistic and are useful to know, but don't formally impact the rest. You have to have a uniform sample, and that can be a tricky thing. One thing I would love to see as an enhancement to all the tools is, first of all, there are discrepancy investigations that are going on. They're not done yet and published yet, and so I can't give you the real data yet. But what I would love to see, there's still an issue, I think, that some audit boards will either mis-enter something as they're entering the data, or in some other way, pick the wrong ballot. There are a couple kinds of discrepancies that show up in the statistics, but don't actually reflect a problem with the tabulation. And I think we really need to identify those and use techniques to fix those as quickly as possible. And so I'd like the tool to tell people right after they blindly enter the data without any prompts, by the way, it looks like there's a mismatch. Can you go back and give me more information that I can use to help you avoid discrepancies, identify what kind this really is, et cetera? I think there's a huge opportunity to make the data high quality, because without high quality data, people are just going to start walking away saying, well, it's hand counting. They can't do it. I don't know. I don't trust it anyway. We have to avoid that, because when you're doing ballot level audits, you have an awesome opportunity to just say, this is the ballot, have the other end check the exact marks on that ballot, and just nail it and get back to making it clearer if it doesn't work. So couple more challenges. This whole bit with doing discrepancies, reporting them more accurately with all the sampling, uniform sampling issues. Making the software more modular so that we can incorporate and drive audits using tools like what Ron Rivest talked about, the suite tool that Philip and Kelly Otobono and colleagues came up with. And then one thing that a lot of you are going to be interested in is precinct scanning. When you do precinct scans, you need to randomize things. We need to respect the anonymity of the ballots. And so we need, I think, to make sure that ballots get a unique ID put on them after they leave the voter, so the voter can't see what the unique ID is, but have that reflected in the cast vote record. And then be able to sample, as you saw Ron's 4-cut or something like that, K-cut, sample from the paper, match it to the CVR, and again, have your best-in-class, most efficient, most effective auditing. So I'd also like to see batch comparison audits. You're going to hear a lot about ballot polling audits. They can be very scary when the margins are tight. But if you have batch comparison, every time you get a pretty close result counting a batch, you increase your confidence. And I think that promotes exactly what we want to do. So I think you've heard most about the rest of that. And I dare say I'm over on time. How are we doing on time? OK. So just my thanks to Paul Tiger and a whole bunch of people that got me involved in 2002, and move on to the next.
Okay, great. So what I want to talk a little bit about is not so much audit specific, but more how do you successfully implement something as big as risk limiting audits, and kind of ask 64 county clerks and all of their staffs with varying expertise and technological situations and cost and all of the challenges that counties face, and say, come with us. This is going to be fun, and it's going to be great.
Fun.
And they all laughed just like that when we said it the first time. So that's what I want to talk about. And so the thing that I think is foundational here, that I think we've all already mentioned, is relationships. We have to use, and in some cases build, a good working relationship so that there's good collaboration. And so trust and frequent, clear communication are really foundational to getting us where we need to be. So there's a couple of parts of that, and I think most critical from the state perspective is that our team has to be responsive. The counties have to be able to trust that when they pick up the phone and they call with what they think may be a crazy or horrible, or maybe makes them look a little less educated question, that we are going to be responsive and we're going to answer the phone and we're going to have a good answer and we're going to help them get where they need to be with it. And so the state has to be responsive, but then also have good, clear communication that is incredibly frequent and layered communication. So it takes a lot of time to build that kind of a relationship and trust, and you're not always in the same place with every county. It's just kind of the nature of interpersonal relationships. And so you have to continually build and work on that relationship. And it's about face-to-face contact and building face-to-face trust over time. So going out to the counties and doing trainings in their environment, going out to counties and visiting their county, understanding their unique circumstances, their space challenges, their financial challenges, the judges' challenges. I mean, it's a whole host of situations that counties deal with, whether they're rural or they're mountain or they're predominantly a single party in their county. So they have varying issues that they have to deal with. And so getting out into the field and helping understand those kind of on a one-on-one basis is pretty important. But then also building really clear guides and documentation is kind of critical to that. And if you do all of these layers, it helps the team have a really good sense of who's going to need a little bit more support, who's going to need more face-to-face contact, who's going to need some go-to-meeting support. So being responsive, layering communication, and having good documentation are all pretty critical. In terms of layering communication, it's not just going out and doing training, but it's also weekly emails with upcoming deadlines, key dates, highlighting parts of the software that may have changed. So leading into the 2018 election, we, in our weekly newsletter, highlighted one key piece of software development that the counties needed to know about. So each week we had a little feature. But then in addition to that, our voting systems manager sent out a weekly email saying, these are the things that are coming up. Don't forget about these deadlines. It was comprehensive, not just about the audit. It was about filing deadlines and planning deadlines, but highlighting the things they needed to know about and kind of continuing to repeat those deadlines over a few weeks, because there's a lot coming at county clerks. And so it's important to keep in mind that they might miss an email or they might miss a call, and so you need to continue layering the information. And I mentioned calls. Having a part of the weekly conference call with the counties devoted to upcoming audit issues and deadlines and timelines, and continuing to kind of drive home the training points from the training that we did months before the election. And then I mentioned documentation. So 2 types of documentation. One is a step-by-step kind of technical manual for how to use the system and the ancillary systems, but then also we call it the county playbook. So working with the counties and putting together step-by-step process documentation. And all of those layers, I think, are critical to success, but then also reaching out for one-on-one training. So all of this gives you a good sense of who might need additional help and who might need some additional coaching. So reach out, spend time on the phone, on a go-to meeting, and be available to do that. And our our experience is that if you've got the trust and the communication and you've got a good process management plan, then your county partners will follow you. And you can implement some really big stuff, and maybe 3 or 4 of them at a time, because that's how we like to tackle stuff. One's not good enough. Let's have 5 initiatives this year. So the other thing,
The motor V database.
plus a different agency will join us. So the other thing I wanted to mention before I jump to training is costs, right? Because everyone always asks, what's the cost of this? And we can quantify the cost of equipment, and we can quantify the cost of labor, and we can quantify the cost of software development. But the cost that's completely unquantifiable here, but is probably the most important, is your human cost. What is the cost of training and being prepared and getting up to speed? And so that's kind of why I think that training and change management are so crucial to implementing a new process. Because if you misstep there, you could have the coolest idea, right, and the best plan, but if you don't go through the process of training and change analysis and change management, you may not be as successful as you'd initially hoped. And so I think that's why these layers help us be so successful. In terms of training, it's about layering the training to kind of deal with the human learning process. So starting with concepts and terms, and then approaching it iteratively. So you can't just learn risk limiting audits in a 2-hour session. It's just not. Okay, I should clarify. Some of you guys probably can learn it. I cannot. I can't, right? So the thing is, you have to approach it step by step and kind of grow together. And the other thing that's really critical, especially when you're dealing with a group of folks with such varying backgrounds, skills, abilities, is respecting the safe learning environment. And affirmatively stating it and protecting it. Because it's really important for folks to feel safe asking what they feel might not be a smart question. And because I guarantee that one person has a question, 5 others have the same question. And so being okay in that environment to say, I don't get it, and approaching it that way, it'll make sure that folks are more honest about the challenges that they have and ask the question, and the training will be better for it. So concepts, terms, general framework, and then why? Why are we doing this? What's in it for the county? What's in it for the voter? What's in it for the candidates? Why are we doing it at all? And also helping understand what rule processes, what changes, what legislative changes are necessary to get us there. Because here's the thing, you can't really, I think, build a legislative or rule framework once. It's iterative as well. You build it the first time, and then you do the process, and you realize there are bottlenecks, there are issues, and you need to go back and adjust for efficiency. Or adjust because it looked good on paper, but then when you actually did it, you're like, oh, yeah, that's not gonna work the way we thought it was. So you go back, you adjust, and you fine tune it. And so knowing that that's the process helps you know that it's gonna be okay. We'll go through the process, but we're not set in stone with what we think the process is right now. And then the technical steps, you have to cover the technical steps at every single one of these processes, because that's actually the most critical piece, right? The technical step of how we're going to do it. But it actually, I think in this process, might be the easiest piece. It's actually all of the process changes you do before that are more challenging. And that's why you need to understand the why to get there and really make sure that we know where we're going together. And then the other thing that I've mentioned is comprehensive documentation. So step-by-step technical guides, and not just for the software tool, but also for the ancillary tools like how do you hash a document? That might seem really straightforward to some folks, but not for our county partners. And it wasn't for me the first time, and turns out you could pick a couple different hash values, right? So you have to know which one are we using uniformly so it doesn't get rejected by the system. And so using screenshots and step-by-step flow, and also keeping it updated. So making sure that as the process adjusts a little bit each time we do it, that the documentation gets updated and adjusted. But then also that the process documents that we work with the clerks on have that same attention. Because there's two parts. There's the technical steps, right? Which buttons do I push? How do I upload it? What happens next? How do I download my list? But also, what do I do to even get to that point to know that it's going to be successful? And to that end, it's important to train around process management generally. So how do we look at our processes, document them, and look for efficiencies, and look for bottlenecks and remove them and get them out of the process? And one-size processes, at least for our teams, don't fit all counties. A process that works in Jefferson County isn't going to work in, say, Yuma County, right? Different size population, different processes, different technology that they have available. And so keeping that in mind, one process that we found successful is train to the goal and then crowdsource the solution. So get the counties of similar size, regions maybe in the same room, and talk about, here's what we want to do. All of us, let's talk about the process. And you know what you come out with is some really innovative stuff. And that's kind of cool. It's a lot of fun when you get in a room and you say, here's what we want to do, how are we going to get there? And then all of the really smart people in that room get us there. And then we document it, right? And we document it and look to improve it. And it's not just about getting the best process, it's also about getting buy-in, because it's our process then. It's not just the state's process that we handed over. The other process thing that's kind of critical that we've realized is minimizing disruptive changes for election judges, and remembering that wholesale changes in any given election increase an opportunity for risk. So the extent to which you can keep processes really similar and adjust, again, iteratively over time, definitely buys success. And then we've also found that practice makes better. So doing it doesn't make perfect. I'm saying, if you practice it wrong, it's just going to happen wrong. But practice makes better. If you design a process and you walk through it. So a lot of our counties took the process that we talked about back to their offices. Then they got their staff and some of their judges in a room, and then they went through the process. And then they found the bottlenecks. They found out where folks, in some cases, literally bumped into each other, and then they streamlined it and they made it better. So practicing it, but also practicing with the auditing itself. So hands-on practice makes a big difference, and it's a really critical part of the training plan. So doing mock RLAs. Look, chaos is okay in a mock. I'm just going to put that out there right now. Like, chaos is okay. Don't let anybody panic, right? So it's better in a mock to have all of the chaos and have the concern and have a little, I'm going to go and say low-level panic, I think. Go low-level panic. Because it helps you learn, right? You learn from the missteps, you learn from where things didn't go kind of as smoothly as you intended, and then when the RLA itself happens, then there's that sort of mental trigger. Oh yeah, got to remember to upload this way, because otherwise that's what happened on the call when I was like, oh, that didn't work. So chaos is okay, and you'd rather have it happen in the mock than in the actual audit. And that's why we do the mock. It's why we practice. And when you go through the mock, it's important to remember that's a training exercise. And so the safe learning environment needs to be maintained there as well. Failure is okay in the mock, because that's how we learn and we improve our processes. And then the other part of that is one-on-one time. So the team spends a lot of time during the mock one-on-one on go-to meetings with counties independently, practicing and helping them upload and making sure they understand the technical steps. And it's really important to make sure that the counties continue to feel comfortable calling us, because all of that time spent on the front end, or all of the time we spend walking through a front end process on how are you going to batch your ballots, are you going to imprint, are you going to handwrite a number, all of that time pays off in the end, because the process is better for it, the training is better for it. And then the other thing that the team does is we walk the counties through errors in the mock and how those shake out downstream. So what's the downstream effect on the county? If they, for example, don't audit every race on the ballot and they only mark the target race, and then there's a bunch of discrepancies, and what does that mean? Or what if they pull ballots out of order and they're not pulling the correct ballot? And what's the effect on their audit, and what's the effect on the statewide audit? Because everyone is tied together on that statewide audit, and that's a little scary, to be honest. So walking them through that, it helps them retain that and remember that for the audit itself. And then allowing as much practice in the system as possible is a pretty important thing. And then finally, debriefing and improving. So we solicit and implement the feedback after every single audit and after every single training. So training, technology, the software, the processes, and then we improve every single time. So, we've done 3 and we've changed after every single one of them, whether it's the technology, whether it's the processes, and the training. And on that front, continuing to conduct training is important because turnover happens. There are always changes in county clerks and staff, and so we do refresher trainings frequently, mocks before every election, and then one-on-one training as often as possible. And then again, any other opportunity to use the system. So, for example, if a county is conducting a city election, we let them in and let them use the system for that. It takes some resources on our end, but that it gives them some opportunities. So for example, 2017, a couple of our counties didn't have an election because there wasn't a statewide issue. And so in the spring when they conducted city elections, we stood the system up so they could do an RLA of that city election. Just a couple more slides before I pass it off to Pam. I just wanted to kind of drive home sort of the soliciting and implementing feedback. So we survey after every training that we do, and I think it's just interesting, a couple of these is that the why do I attend RLA training, and these were from the RLA training we did the second year. And interest in the topic and hearing best practices were amongst the highest responses. And honestly, best practices is the highest response, and it's because our counties share a lot of good best practices in those discussions. That's the benefit of crowdsourcing a process. But also needing a refresher was a pretty high response. And then also, we asked them to rate certain statements and agree or disagree. And it's important to keep in mind that you can't keep everyone happy in a training, but we are continually sort of blown away with the strongly agree to all of the statements in terms of the value and the time spent in having the discussions. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, but the last thing I wanted to mention is that as we implement, I think there's kind of a real responsibility of the state to kind of keep the end goal in mind. Right? So there are a lot of things we have to kind of keep focused on, but it's the state's responsibility, I think, to take all of the input, get the input from all of the interested groups, and then figure out when is the time at which we have to go ahead, make a decision, implement, and then come back and adjust.
So the benefit of going last, and the universe is telling me my lav mic has fallen off 3 times, meaning just shush, right? That's the universe telling me that. And I'm going to channel my best Tammy Patrick and get through my 10 slides in 45 seconds. Yeah, right? So I really appreciate Jennifer inviting me to the discussion today, and this is an amazing group, and it's been a real pleasure to be able to work with them. And my role today is to talk a little bit, and I'm going to talk about it very briefly. But Dylan, you set the stage for us great at NCSL, because our experience in Colorado was. This is a little bit of a case study in policy, and hopefully you can take some of this back with you to your state or your region. Because I do feel like it was a really good way to legislate an idea that we couldn't actually do at the time that the conversations happened. So I'm going to go through really quickly some of the legislation that we went through. There are links in the PowerPoint that you can go download. But we were in a pretty contentious reform environment. Well, we're always in a contentious reform environment in Colorado. HAVA came along in 2002, and actually my county, Jefferson County, it's about 500,000 people just west of Denver. I have suburban and mountain precincts. And when I came in, Hilary and I were elected together, well, separately, different counties, very different counties. Very different counties. We were elected together in 2006, and when we came in, HAVA had been around for a few years. We were, in my county, an early implementer of HAVA. So we had Ivotronic, all digital, no paper systems that were purchased in 2002, no VPAT. So some of you that are, in the election administrator level, you might still be in sort of this, we've got these legacy systems. And I was, in one other county, was that county. And when we came in, Colorado's certification of the systems, now keep in mind, most of our rural counties implemented HAVA in 2006. They just purchased systems right under the wire. They had VPAT. But a lot of money had been spent on these systems. The very next year in 2007, the new Secretary of State, we've had 5 of them in 12 years, just to set the stage for you. Decertified everything. We decided, because we're Colorado, we're snowflakes, we love the way we do our stuff, that we were gonna write our own standards and no system could meet it, including the ones we had just bought, and there was nothing else on the horizon. So it created a really interesting policy environment for us. And Hilary and I came in, and she came from a community that had been talking about this stuff for a long time. My community, not so much, right? I mean, we really hadn't. And so the first thing we had to do is, well, we've got a presidential election in 2008. How are we going to do our election? So the first bill was about temporarily certifying our systems, and then having a more global conversation about how do we want to do this in Colorado, and that's where we came in. Okay, that wasn't 45 seconds, Tammy. I'm feeling really like I'm not living up to you. So what happened was an election reform commission was established. These are legislators and local officials and advocates, and there were subcommittees. And one of the subcommittees, and Hilary and I were legislative co-chairs together for most of my tenure. We did a lot of work together on the legislative front. We're a bipartisan team. We're like sisters that were raised by 2 different families of wolves. And so we were like, really the universe was telling Colorado that we could vet some of these ideas. And these concepts came up that had been discussed in Boulder and from really smart people, a lot smarter people than me. And what struck me is, this is how we do audits now, but doesn't it make more sense that we do them like this, in the sense that it's just, your election officials are pragmatic. And when we started talking about, auditing election results, that made sense to me. I also understood that paper is important, but it may take a little bit of time. So really the first documented instance from a policy perspective in Colorado that was broader than a county level was out of this committee that said, we think it might be a good idea to do a risk-based audit design versus a current fixed percentage, right? And it was huge. The commission itself didn't necessarily support everything that came out of these committees, but it really planted some seeds. So in 2009, we had to figure out certification. We decided that, in my county, 98% of people voted in their primary by mail ballot, which, by the way, is a paper ballot. Woohoo! I didn't have VPAT, and we also had a bill, 1335, that dealt with certification and audits. And the particular section, 1-7-515, is substantially the same. And this was passed in 2009. It did have an implementation date. It set up pilots. I'm just going to say pilot, 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 pilot some more, and then pilot again. Because it really is a good idea, because not every audit needs to be designed the same. It doesn't have to be the same, but it really made a big, big difference in what we did in Colorado, and we learned a lot about it. In 2013, we changed our election model. It was a really big deal, and we pushed that implementation deadline to 2017. Why? Our legacy systems couldn't produce a CVR, and we needed to transition to systems that could. And we wanted to go paper-based, but what we wanted to do was deliver it by mail. And so all of these, an audit comes within a system. And we were looking at these pieces and implementing it and evolving to that point, and that was super important. So some of the challenges we had fits and starts in our pilots. Our first pilots were not successful. And so some of the things that I significantly remember and have some scars on, not the same scars that Neal and Hilary have, because, oh my God, when I looked at what they were doing, I said, yeah, no, never. Not going to do that, right? So those of you that might have some resistance, I've been there. But make sure you identify your robust partners. The trust partner that Hilary was talking about, Hilary Rudy here was talking about, was super important. There are lots of opportunities for collaboration and innovation. I'm trying to find my space. Thank you. Oh no, I was looking at my notes, but that's okay. And there's lots of opportunity to do that. We've referenced the playbook. I'm not going to talk about it in great detail just because we're way over and you've heard it already. But there's all the guides that we are really lucky in Colorado, all the technical guides for the tool, and thanks to Free and Fair and Democracy Works, because we could not do this statewide without a tool that does the math, because I'm a history major. And there was just no way that we would be able to do this at the local level, so I'm super appreciative of that. And all those step-by-steps that go to a mostly uniform system where we can develop consistent procedures was super important. Our playbook has things in it that we know at the local level. The state doesn't process ballots, so we understand what makes sense to what are the best ways, recommendations for keeping your batches small. How about numbering or imprinting? Thanks to Arapahoe for designing and working with Dominion on an imprinter, that really helped out. And how about batch labels? What does a batch label look like? I mean, when you have 64 counties, sharing is super important. So putting all those things together was key, and it's an iterative document, as Hilary said. We learned things from our state level, one just a few weeks ago, so we'll be working on it again to say, hey, what did you learn about that? Yeah, keep going. There I go. Now I'm going, Tammy. I do want to say that you will come up upon items. Colorado is a bit of a snowflake, so we have really awesome and very complex elections. We have multi-card ballots. We have a lot of coordination with local jurisdictions. We have provisions in our law, in our Constitution, where so the provisions in our state law are ballots are public, the CVR is public, images are public. And we have a constitutional provision that says election officials can't disclose how you voted in any way, shape, or form. And all of our districts, we have pocket precincts, we have vote method styles, we have all sorts of things that are a big consideration. You might come across some of those things when you start implementing it. And like we said, we haven't really figured all of that out. I am happy to report it has been a little bit of a long and ongoing road, but it is worth it. Our audit makes more sense now. We can communicate it more clearly. We're looking at ballots and how they were tabulated, not a transitive. I mean, that's ballots and how they were tabulated. Big deal. It does expose humanity in new and interesting ways, which is why we love our jobs in elections, because it's an awesome experiment in humanity. And the audit will do that even more for you. So one reason to do it. I do want to have some recognition for the complexity and all the stakeholders that helped us out. And I do want to say, to sort of tie a bow on this for like half a question, I know we don't have a lot of time, but Jennifer talked about procedural audits. And don't be surprised that when you start contemplating these things at the local level, that if you're not already doing it, you start looking at procedural ways to look at things. When I came in, I wasn't 100% on board for the mail ballot thing. And now I have a tattoo somewhere. No, I don't. But some people think I do about mail ballot elections. And one of the things that gave me confidence was when we started talking about this idea, and I dusted off my statistics book from my MPA program, which I couldn't believe I had to take, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. I thought, hey, I wonder of that big pile of signature verification ballots that we do that get accepted, and we look really hard at the rejected ones, how good are our judges at verifying signatures? So we created a statistically valid quality assurance audit, because my husband and I have a die-cast business, and if you need powder coating, come talk to me. But, and applied that. But this conversation led me to start thinking about things like that. Or for the printer, insertion and overspray, are we getting the right style? Doing sampling audits of that. So don't be surprised if it doesn't lead. And I do think those things are happening out there. What we need to do is bring those best ideas together. And so I really appreciate this painful conversation that you guys started about 10, well, for me it was about 10 years ago, because it led to really good things. And some of the bleeding edge stuff is done. And really hope that as you're here, so I know you're exploring it, whether or not it's legislated or not, we're here for you as a resource. So I hope you take advantage of it.
All right. You did well. Thank you. We are out of time. Oh.
Just one question,
Yep.
and it's for...
Because it's you, Jerome, you can have the one question.
Jerome Lovato with the EAC. This is for Hilary Hall. Can you just tell the audience how long the enhanced audit took, the former state standard audit, and then risk limiting audit? Like how many in days or hours?
So the best of my recollection, because part of the way you do elections is you forget what you already did, so the pain goes away. So the way I remember it, Neal probably has actual information about it, but it would take us, I want to say 4 days. We start with teams of 20 people, 10 teams each for our statistically enhanced. Then we found when we did the state audit, it was actually pretty similar in time, and then this one, it took us an afternoon. So another selling point. Yeah.